I think it's nice that we share the same sky.
What do you mean?
Well, like, sometimes at playtime, I look up to the sky, and if I can see the sun, then I think about the fact that we can both see the sun, so even though we're not actually in the same place and we're not actually together, we kind of are in a way, you know?
It's always hard to call a movie your favorite of all time. It's a heavy weight to give a film, and maybe it's the novelty speaking, but I think Aftersun is so close to absolute perfection for me personally that it almost deserves such a title. At the very least, Aftersun has to be my favorite film of 2022, and even that is saying a lot with such excellent competition. Every time I reach the credits, I feel the overwhelming urge to restart the film from the beginning and watch it all over again, and somehow it gets better every time. The film is as heartwarmingly beautiful as it is tragic, and an absolutely incredible debut feature by Charlotte Wells. It speaks volumes through its quiet subtlety, and somehow never gets dull or boring in its moments of stillness. All the pieces of narrative and character development, as well as the attentive cinematography, editing, and filmmaking choices in the lead up to the final moment, come together to create an astoundingly authentic feeling film about growing up and watching time and people pass you by as they disintegrate into fragments buried deep within the unreachable realm of your memory.
When you were 11, what did you think you would be doing now? Hello? What did you think you would be doing now?
Well, so turn it off now, okay?
Aftersun is in essence a portrait of a relationship, viewed in all its microscopic details, but only understood when pulling back to see these details in the bigger picture. Each conversation, facial expression, and moment between these characters is like a finely coordinated brushstroke on a painting. Nothing much on their own, but with one another becomes something greater, a single cohesive work of art that tells a story just as implicitly as it does explicitly. Each and every detail important, unrepeatable, and irreplaceable. The same can be said for the filmmaking, with everything from the shot choice and scene composition to the pace of editing and delicately synchronized score, all contributing towards this holistic portrait of these characters. Though the filmmaking may appear rather simplistic and slow on the surface, Wells' cinematic choices reflect the characters and the themes of the film in a quietly authentic subtlety, crafting one of the best cinematic character studies of recent years. Aftersun focuses its attention on the relationship between Callum, a young father, and Sophie, his 11-year-old daughter, acted to perfection by Paul Mescal and Frankie Corio respectively. Over the course of a one-week trip to Turkey, we follow these two as they bond with one another and try to enjoy their stay abroad, Sophie unaware that this will be the last time she will ever see her father, with his implied suicide at the end of the film. Aftersun takes the form of a coming-of-age drama for both Callum and Sophie, Callum learning and struggling as a young parent, and Sophie evolving and maturing into a teenager. This is what the film focuses on in terms of physical plot points, watching Sophie exercise her free will in interaction with her father.
Stop doing that.
Doing what?
Offering to pay for something when I know you don't have the money.
And experiment with her sexuality in trying to understand herself. Aftersun wastes no time in its relatively short length, with every seemingly slow and superfluous moment contributing to our understanding of the core characters. The many apparently redundant side characters serve only as a means to understanding Callum and Sophie and the central concept at the heart of the film. For example, even with no real lines of dialogue, this random family's brief moment on screen helps to highlight Sophie's growing interest in becoming a teenager, Callum's position as a young and struggling single father, and the close bond the two of them share above all else.
Why don't you go over and introduce yourself?
Dad, no, they're like kids.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you go over and introduce yourself?
Sophie, they're like old.
The film lets these moments emerge organically, following the simple and naturalistic progression of what is unassumingly a family holiday. Everything on the surface is as it appears, a simple chain of moments of life happening, split between the memorable moments of fun and excitement, accentuated through the character of Sophie, and the quiet stillness we tend to forget, emphasized through the cinematography and editing. film never posits or protests a point of view or ideological stance. Nothing is ever forced upon the audience, but rather the film remains non-judgmental of its ideas, allowing everything to progressively unwind naturally. For a movie of this style, with such relevant and heavy topics, Aftersun really doesn't place that much attention on its dialogue, where its contemporaries usually would, but rather lets its themes simmer beneath the surface as they slowly come to a boil. Likewise, Wells holds on particular shots for an uncomfortably long time, denying the customary release of cutting away to the next shot or scene. This creates a sense of realism and empathy, allowing us to feel more like we are watching the real life of these characters unfold in all of their details and mundanity, as though we could almost be there with them. And when the release finally does come, it no longer feels necessary. We gain a greater sense of the characters in seeing almost too much of them, viewing their private lives in extensive, almost uncomfortable, though still often implicit detail. The dialogue too feels like it is being spoken by real people in a day-to-day fashion, greatly assisted by the style of the relationship between the characters, and in particular, their conflicting attitudes and perspectives based upon their differing ages. Sophie is young and energized, looking forward to the future, while Callum has clearly been through a lot and can't help but find himself trapped looking back at the past. The two of them together act as though they are two sides of the same coin, emphasizing a distinct philosophical conflict, even if it remains unsaid. This is perhaps best exemplified in how each of them view the idea of age and birthdays, Sophie's sense of optimism contrasted by Callum's sense of pessimism. Wells also uses more subtle cinematic techniques interwoven throughout the film to create a visually signified disconnect between the two characters. The most prominent of these is probably this scene, where Callum and Sophie interact from two sides of the same wall, Callum lit with dim, cool lighting, and Sophie with a much brighter, warm-toned lighting. Callum's side is also more cramped, sterile, and claustrophobic, while Sophie's is more open and homely. Through this simple imagery, Wells draws a clear line between the two characters, emphasizing the underpinning tonal and emotional qualities running through each of them. Wells extends this disconnect by exploring the ways in which these characters interact with the world around them. Water, for example, plays a big role, visually and metaphorically underscoring the whole film, but it means something different to each character. To Sophie, it's a way of learning and exploring the world, using it, for example, as a lens to watch the older kids through her inquisitive gaze, while Callum sees it in a much darker sense, feeling almost trapped beneath it, like he is drowning, or perhaps like he wishes he was. This is why, while Sophie is sharing her first kiss by the crystal clear water of a calm indoor swimming pool, Callum walks out into the crashing waves of the ocean, into what appears only as a pitch black abyss as the sounds of the waves take over. Like the water, the sky also becomes a visual metaphor, connecting the two characters as Sophie explains, but again creating a more subconscious disconnect between them. While Sophie looks up at the sky, Callum is often looking down or has his eyes shut entirely, because where Sophie sees possibility, Callum only sees his own limitations. So while Sophie is transfixed by the paragliders we often see soaring through the sky, almost as if they are birds, emphasizing the idea of freedom,
Can we do that?
Callum sees them only as something he cannot afford, and so ignores them, remaining firmly on the ground.
You're too young, Poppet.
The film often lingers on shots of the sky or the sea, further driving in this visual symbolism and subconsciously alluding to the darkness at the core of the film that splits these characters. That's why it's all the more heartbreaking when Callum affirms Sophie's optimistic view of the world, because we know that what he's telling Sophie, he will never truly believe of himself.
You can live it wherever you want to live. Be whoever you want to be. You have time.
All of these interactions, while seemingly insignificant, are what creates the film. There is a lingering sense just below the surface that things will go wrong at any moment. Specific glances and tones in the characters' voices, as well as the eerie, almost hypnotizing score, build up a persistent sense of subtle tension that never quite reveals itself. Like hearing the Jaws theme without ever seeing the shark, with moments such as this one where Callum teaches Sophie self-defense, or this later sequence where Sophie explores the resort alone at night, the film alludes to the potential idea of something happening to Sophie, possibly being kidnapped or assaulted. However, like the way Aftersun holds onto its shots, denying the cathartic release of cutting away, nothing ever really does happen, and it's not until after the film is over that the real tragedy occurs, and even then, the moment is only implied and never really releases the tension until the very last shot. Aftersun never reveals everything that is happening, but rather opts for a more realistic ambiguity. By the end of the film, we still don't even know what it is exactly that has been affecting Callum throughout, but just the overall mass sense of despair and misery. This is because the film aims to mirror real life, which often plays out this way, without any real context, and in particular, because it's Sophie's perspective that we follow. Though she understands a lot about her father, such as the fact he's struggling financially,
I know it was expensive.
she can never truly understand everything he's going through. The film spends a lot of time unpacking this idea, the simultaneous closeness and distance we find in a parent-child relationship, the ways in which children are an extension and reflection of their parents, and also how they are their own person, growing further away day by day. Upon rewatching Aftersun, with the knowledge of the film's ending, everything feels even more imminently tragic. Every scene, sequence, and line of dialogue contributes to the story as a whole and becomes more significant on a second viewing. For example, the rug Callum buys just before the midpoint of the film. We know broadly of his financial situation, but bearing in mind the film's ending, we understand that he wants to leave something behind for Sophie to hold on to, a memento for their final trip together. So it becomes even more heartbreaking when he explains how each rug's patterns are unique.
Each of these carpets tell a different story. Like the symbols and motifs, they represent different things.
In a way, he is suggesting to Sophie, and us as the audience, that this rug now tells the story of their final time together, just as intricate and finely detailed as the film itself. Equally, this is why this simple shot of a Polaroid of the two slowly developing on their final night is one of my favorite shots in the film, because upon rewatching, the tragedy of this moment is irrefutably blatant. We now know that this captured memory, like all others, will be lost to time, and though it is slowly emerging from nothing, we can't help but almost see it as something disappearing into thin air. The slow and gradual nature of the shot draws attention to the sense of time passing by, and alerts us to the impending doom of the fact that everything that is happening is inevitably heading to a cold and irreversible end.
Did you have a good holiday then?
The best. Wish we could have stayed for longer.
Though Aftersun follows the aforementioned format of a coming-of-age drama, we come to realize this is only a persona, with neither character really reaching their coming-of-age moment. Instead, the film just ends, a more circumstantial coming-of-age forced upon Sophie at the close of the film, even though the moment is only implied and never really comes to fruition. Aftersun reflects that sense of inconclusive endings that we constantly find throughout our own lives, many questions remaining unanswered. This subtle realism gives Aftersun a sense of truthfulness, almost as though we are looking back at something that didn't happen to us and seeing it as though it were a memory. This is the whole core purpose of the film, creating, through the product of all its elements, what feels like a liminal space between the film's story and our own memories and experiences. Though on the surface, the camera work is simplistic, Aftersun carefully and concisely uses its cinematography to reflect these themes. Rarely is a film able to so subtly and yet so profoundly use its cinematography in a way like this, physically driving the narrative forwards. Wells uses the portable home movie camera, for example, to emphasize this idea of memories, capturing much of the film's moments as though they really happened. So not only is this footage in part what we view, therefore making up a portion of the film and its subsequent impact on the audience, but it is also a physical driver of the narrative, as the whole purpose of Callum recording the trip is to give Sophie memories to look back on. This home camera footage acts as a time portal into the past, evoking a sense of nostalgia and impermanence as we watch the grainy images vanish just as quickly as they materialize, reflecting the same feeling we have as we live through each moment of our lives. Even when Wells focuses on the trip outside the confinements of the home camera footage, the cinematography acts towards the same effect. Many of the shots are directed away from the characters, capturing them only in the reflections of other objects, highlighting the perspective of Sophie, who in reality is now the same age her father was during the trip, looking back at the aforementioned home footage. In the same way the film is interspersed with the found footage aspect, throughout the film at almost regular intervals, the holiday is broken by scenes seemingly taking place in the darkness of a club, jolting between pitch black and harsh white light in a strobing fashion. The effect of this technique is very jarring and contrasts the quiet stillness of their vacation. But more importantly, this effect echoes our perception of memory, strobing in and out of existence and always seemingly just out of reach. In the final moments of the film, this abstract imagery aligns with the plot of the film as Callum and Sophie dance together on their final night. And like the music suggests, this will be their last dance. Through the intercutting of the film's two scenes, Wells' family ties the film's themes together, giving us perhaps the film's most heartbreaking shot as we see the momentary flash of the young Sophie again, full of optimism as her father falls into the abyss. This moment highlights the feeling of loss, bringing Sophie's younger self into the world of her broken present self, emphasizing the discrepancy. The scene is uncomfortably fragmented as to not let Sophie or ourselves hold on to this moment, which slips away before our very eyes. And then just as abruptly, the moment ends, leaving us with the final scene as we return again to view the last ever video of the two on their holiday. Callum filming as Sophie heads off into the airport, happiness on her face. And when the video ends, we circle around to see Sophie watching this last clip. And just like her, we know everything has come to an end. It becomes apparent in this moment that there are really two sides to the whole narrative. The first being the simple and straightforward story of a father and daughter on holiday in a foreign country. And the second being the tragedy of sharing your final moments with someone you love. Neither one of these aspects of the film would have worked without the other. The ending is as impactful as it is because we grow to know these characters and understand their bond throughout the body of the runtime. And the lead up to this moment is as significant and enthralling as it is because we know what all of these moments mean in light of the film's ending. Wells concludes the film with one last image outside of Sophie's memory, finding ourselves with Callum one final time as he closes the camera on this last piece of footage, his final gift to his daughter. And as he walks back down the long corridor that leads into the strobing darkness, this moment acts as to symbolically show Callum receding away one final time into Sophie's memory, into a world she will never be able to reach. And with every step he takes, interlaced with the sound of a baby crying, presumably Sophie, this last moment with his daughter echoes to him what likely was his first, a moment that he too cannot reach.